Brand new suit, same old business shirt, however. You got to dress for the job you want, not the job you've got. And the job I've got is YouTube. Start this with a catchphrase that came up many times in my life in different fields of research. Not all tribal peoples are indigenous, and not all indigenous people are tribal. I can remember that catchphrase of mine, of my own invention, came as a kind of revelation and philosophical talking point to people working on anthropology in elite universities like Cambridge and Oxford, to people, frankly, doing linguistics in Cambodia, people working on different kinds of tribal and indigenous peoples in northern Laos, southwestern Yunnan, Southeast Asia. And then when I returned to Canada to work on Cree and Ojibwe as languages, that same catchphrase came up again and again, especially when talking about the politics of one group of indigenous people being posed against the others. For example, the conflict between the Cree and the Blackfoot, or the Cree and the Snake Indians, or what have you. Often there were contests over who was truly indigenous in a given area. Compare the Cree and the Dene. It's an even better example. What land was really Dene land and what was really Cree land? Quite apart from the question of English and French colonialism. Got a question that came in, as I think you already know from the description of this video, question that came in basically about white ethno-nationalism. And I understand why this person sent me this question. It's from a Patreon supporter who will definitely remain nameless because I don't want to embarrass the guy. He's gone out on a limb and asked me a potentially very provocative question. And let's just say, we've had a lot of discussion about censorship here on YouTube and on Patreon lately. It is likely, it is inevitable that this video will be demonetized, and it's likely it will be banned just because I am answering this question. So it'll probably get the status where it's not visible outside the United States of America, or it's not listed and restricted status. I've had that happen to me repeatedly. If you talk about real politics in a real way, no matter how politically correct you are on YouTube, you do face a certain kind of chilling effect. So this will be gray-listed, if not blacklisted, but I appreciate his courage in asking the question, and I hope he appreciates my courage in giving you the answer. You don't get a sense. It's actually a pretty tight-fitting suit, but because I'm holding my phone up there, it looks like it balloons out. All right, I'm assuming you guys are going to see more of this suit because I don't own that many changes of costume here at à-bas-le-ciel Broadcasting Corporation. All right, maybe we'll find some more. Maybe we'll find some more menswear before we leave Germany. Maybe. All right. Okay, he asks, "Hi, Eisel. I'm a new Patreon, but I've seen many of your videos over the past few years on YouTube. I wanted to ask your thoughts on ethnic nationalism, and specifically if it fits into your definition of inherently racist." So that's not a term I use. I totally understand the question, but I do not use the term inherently racist. I don't think there is a meaningful distinction between something being intrinsically and extrinsically racist, but I know what he means. I know why he's asking. He continues, quote, "My background is that I am a white American, but being quote-unquote white is only part of my identity inasmuch as it is an objective description of my skin color and a genetic indication of my ancestry. Or to say it another way, I don't consider the term white American to be meaningful at all in any kind of profound sense. Other races and ethnicities can be just as American as me." Okay, close quote. Pause. Do you think that would be your perspective if you were Mohawk Indian? Do you think a member of the Mohawk tribe right now, probably living in Montreal, some of them still live on the reservation. We just looked up the number, about 24,000 of them in Canada. Do you think the Mohawks would say what you just said, that anyone can be just as Canadian as them or anyone can be just as American as them? How about the Ojibwe? How about the Navajo? Do you see how your question is, in a not too subtle way, already missing a very fundamental point? You feel that as a white American, that Chinese people can be just as American as you. Oh, really? Oh, yeah? This ain't New England. This is never going to be New England, where you're living, right? It's never going to be New Europe. It's always going to be old genocide. So I think there's a very fundamental assumption here you're missing. All right? But hey, thanks for writing in. You'll share. We're not done. We're not done with the Q&A session yet. He continues. This is the beginning and not the end of our discourse on this matter. Okay. However, so quote, "However, in taking your advice and using sympathy as a philosophical tool, I wonder to what extent physical appearance does have a real meaning in terms of what it means to be part of a particular nationality. Perhaps you have some insights you can share from your travels, since my personal experience has been limited compared to yours. Like, I've traveled so much in Asia, I presume. Well, I've traveled a lot in Europe, too, at this point. I have a couple of questions I want to ask. One, quote, would you or I ever be considered Chinese, Japanese, Kenyan, etc. by the native citizens if we were to live in and become citizens of their country? What about our theoretical children with a Chinese, Japanese, or Kenyan wife? Okay, so close quote. Wait, so this is a meaningful question, and I'm going to give a relatively short answer. I'm not going to monologue for an hour about the differences between Chinese and Japanese culture, which it would be an interesting video to a small number of people. That is. I mean, it's a real question you can talk about. And even within China, you can talk about how Hong Kong is different from Yunnan. You can talk about different regions, what it's like to assimilate into the Dongbei, and what it's like to be out in a border area with India and what have you. You know, so I mean, there's a lot to say just about China and Japan. But the problem here is the asymmetry. The indigenous people of China are Chinese. Now, they're not only Chinese. There are other indigenous ethnic minority groups. The vast majority of the indigenous people of China are Han Chinese. Now, the indigenous people of Germany are German. There are some other groups. In Germany, there's also a group called the Sorbs. The Sorbs are an indigenous ethnic minority in Germany. They don't come from somewhere else. They've just always been in Germany. There are some, but the vast majority of the indigenous people of Germany are Germans. We can continue. Switzerland is multilingual and multi-ethnic, but you can break down province by province in Switzerland who is indigenous. So you see why I opened with this leitmotif? Not all indigenous people are tribal. Not all tribal people are indigenous, right? How about where you're from? How about the United States of America? Who's indigenous there? How about your state? How about your city? What language did they speak? What religion did they have? What was their style of dress? What was their system of government? What was their political history before you took it all away from them? I'm sorry, it's not the same. I understand why you're asking the question, and it's a fascinating question to answer. I could just answer the question of what is it like to be an immigrant in China or Japan or several other examples that I either know directly or to some extent indirectly through friends or through research and whatever. Sure, it's fascinating. But this is never going to be the same for continents like North America and Australia, where the scenario we're talking about is all built on a bedrock of genocide. And not even cultural genocide. Absolute genocide. I'll come back to that distinction, that there's cultural genocide and then there's just outright genocide, that these are two different things. When I lived in Laos, I learned to speak the Lao language, and it was not my top priority. This is an answer to your question directly. It's not a digression. When I was in Laos, I had many other priorities, including learning an ancient language called Pali. So learning Lao was not the main thing I was working on. But I did put some time and effort into learning Lao. And toward the end of my time there, when the government had already threatened to kill me and exiled me from the country, putting an abrupt end to my humanitarian work, and the threat to kill me went on and on. There were details of the threats to murder me. My parents would never find my body. It would be disposed of under such and such conditions, and so on and so forth. And my coworkers were interrogated by the Communist Party and had to make confessions for their failure to report me as a thought criminal, the Communist Party, and this kind of thing. So it was a big event, bringing an abrupt end to my research, humanitarian work, and language study in Laos. And at that late stage, I had the touching and unexpected experience of Laotian people referring to me in Lao as Laotian. And one old woman said of me, she was saying this reassuringly to a middle-aged Laotian man. She said, "Don't worry, he's a white Lao. Like, he's white, but he's one of us. He's white, but he's Laotian," which stunned me. I'd never thought of that possibility before, that I would be accepted as Laotian. I'm big. I'm 6'3", 6'3" in the morning, 6'2.5" about this time of day now. Anyway, look, yeah, that was stunning to me, and I'd never thought of it. Laotian culture is quite accepting of outsiders. And the flip side of that was what had happened to me several times before that, were people attacking me and denouncing me for being Laotian with hatred. Thai people, Thai people hating me for being, they didn't use the term a white Lao. I think maybe one of them did. I think one of them said I was a white Lao. But they mostly just attacked me for being Laotian. And it's real obvious that I'm in no sense ethnically Laotian. So there are some ethnic groups in Asia that are still recruiting. Put it that way. There are some, it's not even ethnic groups. There are some nationalities. That's really the term to use here. Laotian is really a nationality and not just an ethnic group. Not going to get into it. And there are some that consider themselves closed to outsiders. And there are some that are halfway in between. And, but I remember I got a lot of anecdotes about a guy in Mongolia and his experience. And Mongolian culture, again, it seemed to be pretty open to accepting him. If he converted to and accepted Mongolian Buddhism, and if he drank Mongolian liquor with them and a few other things like this, then they were pretty open to him being kind of taken on board. But Japanese culture is famous the other way, that it does. You can never be Japanese enough if you aren't 100% from there. Even if you are ethnically Japanese, but you were born in Brazil. There's a huge body of scholarly literature on that. Ethnically Japanese people who migrated to Brazil and migrated back again, and they're never accepted. They're always treated as foreigners. There are many scenarios like this. So different answers in different scenarios. Number 2, quote, if theoretically half of the citizens of China, Japan, or Kenya, any of these countries, if half the citizens of China, let's say, were white, Middle Eastern, or Mexican, i.e. they were some other nationality, would a resistance to that from the native citizens be morally right or wrong in your opinion? It's happening right now within China. Google Xinjiang, Google Tibet, Google any of the instances within China of the Han Chinese systematically eradicating the indigenous people and population. And step 1 is by moving in Han Chinese to become the majority. So the very intentional erasure of Tibetan culture, the very intentional erasure of Xinjiang culture is ongoing, and it's a form of relatively slow motion and genteel cultural genocide, not outright genocide. Again, an issue we have to come back to again and again. So, what do you mean resistance? Right? I mean, this opens up all kinds of questions, but this is not hypothetical. This is actual. As soon as you get into, a kind of deeper level of knowledge of any of these places, I would absolutely assume, certainly within Africa, within Kenya, there are some really, really shocking ethnic conflicts within Kenya. I know this much about it, so on and so forth. However, look, what do you mean by resistance? Every country in the world simply dictates how many immigrants they're going to accept and how many they're going to reject. It's called immigration policy. Unfortunately, in 2018, we live in a period of time when everything the left wing says about immigration policy is bullshit. Everything the right wing says about immigration policy is bullshit. And everything that is said by the moderates at every gradation in the middle is dishonest and misleading bullshit. From my perspective, immigration policy, whether we're talking about refugees, illegal immigration, or legal, licit mainstream immigration, de jure immigration, we could say. All of it, it's in a black box where nobody is really allowed to discuss what the facts are or what the options are or what we're going to do moving forward. And although in many ways it's obvious I'm probably more further to the left than Bernie Sanders, many people consider me right-wing. Many people consider me conservative just because of my position on immigration. And I guess you could say I am an immigration skeptic. For lack of a better term. So everybody's lying about it. Nobody wants to deal with it. And, look, Japan, it's not resistance. It's no question of resistance. Policy. It's an overt policy. The government decides. There's a number. And nobody wants to admit it. They draw a number on a piece of paper and say, this is how many immigrants we're going to accept. This is how many refugees we're going to accept. This is how many migrant workers on a 2-year visa we're going to accept. There are targets established for all of them. And yeah, most countries, there's a little bit of flexibility where they'll kind of respond to the automotive industry saying they need some more workers or something. There's some flexibility to the system. But sure, this is all legislated. It's all fiat. What can I tell you? So most cases you're talking about, resistance is irrelevant. Where is it not irrelevant? Tibet. Where is it not irrelevant? The Khmer Krom, southern Vietnam, the forcible eradication of Cambodian people, language, culture, literature, music, religion in southern Vietnam. It's not even legal. When I was last there and involved with this, it was not even legal to own an audio CD with music in the Cambodian language, in the Khmer Krom in southern Vietnam. They had a really active program of eradication and rewriting history and at least cultural genocide in the Khmer Krom, in an area that historically had been part of Cambodia for thousands of years, but that the Vietnamese managed to annex. Annex is the word, not conquer, and that they were trying to Vietnamize. Huge issue. So those issues really exist, but they're not in the framework of this question, your question number 2. We now go on to question number 3. Question number 3, is it possible to have some nations, for example, the United States, Canada, etc., where race and ethnicity matters little or not at all, while also having other countries, like Japan, where it matters much more, and both modes are morally acceptable? How would you feel if you were born and raised in India, where the whole history of your culture, the whole history of your continent, had to do with being conquered by foreign powers and resisting them? Not to give a complete list, but most notably including conquest by the Muslims from the north and conquest from the British Empire from the ocean by the south. That's in all of your education and all of your sense of identity, is that what it means to be Indian, especially to be a Hindu in India, is to resist this foreign encroachment. It's a very different form of nationalism, isn't it? Right? It's a very different perspective on the world. When India achieved independence from the British Empire, one of the biggest and most bitterly fought over debates was of what would happen to the Anglo-Indians, to the ethnically white population. I should have Googled this, how many millions of them there were, I forget. There was a really, really large population of white people in India. Some of them have been there for 100 years, 150 years, whatever. Their families for a couple of generations, as part of the British Empire. Would they all just be forced to leave, or what? Would all their property be seized? Would they be kicked out overnight? Would it be a Holocaust type situation, or what? How is this really going to proceed? Because one way or another, India did not want to be the dominion of a white elite of overlords who had taken up their status in society through conquest and colonialism, and corporate rule by the British East India Company. Different perspective, isn't it? Huh? So is it possible to have some nations where race and ethnicity matters little or not at all? Walk down the streets in New York City. Who are they named after? What is New York named after? Where is Old York? What language was spoken in New York City? The problem is you're asking this from the perspective of a country where the process of genocide and colonialism is so far advanced that it's become invisible to you. Whereas in a country like India, it advanced up to a certain point, and then the tide of history was reversed.